Welcome to our first episode for 2026. This is the Spy Collection and I'm Anastasios. The fun and festive episodes are over, and we look at a recent case which could be hiding a disinformation operation. But first, some context. All spy agencies have one mission: to find all the necessary information to give their leaders an unfair advantage. In other words, to understand the world. Now, in some rare cases, understanding is not enough, and intel agencies are tasked to change the world, transition from collecting intelligence and passively observing the changes to actively taking actions that will change the world. In Russia and many of the former USSR countries, this falls under something that is called active measures. In US, for example, that's called covert action. Now, the most well-known type of active measures is disinformation, or Disinformation in Russian. This is a huge domain, but think of it in this way. The agency is tasked to change the perception of a target group in order to support a specific foreign policy. Doing that based on lies is the least effective means, since it can be easily disputed and die. We shared such an example in 2024 when Russian intel services set up a website that looked like a legitimate Hungarian news outlet and released an alleged intercepted communication indicating that a group of Ukrainian agents were plotting the assassination of Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. This was easy to dispute since its source was literally a fake website impersonating a real one. However, it was designed in a way that still some believe it, since it's literally impossible to disprove whether that recording was real or not. A more clever disinformation approach, though, is when real facts and evidence are being used, but in a way that helps change the recipient's perception. Say, hypothetically, that an important person had an accident and died. That's a fact. Maybe that person had some publicly known opposing groups, which could also be a fact. But those two aren't necessarily related. So a clever disinformation could be to present the two in a way that leads the recipient to make a mental connection between the two, thus making them target that opposing group. That's because, as we learned from the equivalent experts of Britain's GCHQ, based on a secret training leaked by Edward Snowden titled The Art of Deception, people make decisions for emotional reasons, not rational ones. We had published a full video of this in 2021, in case you want to learn more about it. So people make decisions for emotional reasons, not rational ones. Alright, so we covered what active measures are and how modern disinformation looks like. And now we have this. Backfire: how sanctions reshape the world against US interests. Published in 2022 and written by Agate Demare, a French senior policy fellow on geoeconomics and tech at the European Council of Foreign Relations, ECFR, who previously worked as Global Forecasting Director of the Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU, a visiting professor at the College of Europe, and an advisor to the Policy Planning Unit of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among many others. In other words, a true subject matter expert. Even more so, beyond her deep economics knowledge and experience, she also knows the Russian economy quite well, since she served there as economic policy advisor for the diplomatic corps of the French Treasury in Russia, and also worked in investment banking in Russia before. This book is basically a scientific approach on the topic of using sanctions as a foreign policy tool, and other coercive economic measures including tariffs, financial penalties, and export controls, and what are the side effects of following this approach. It's based on real-world studies and scientific methodologies to demonstrate when it does and when it doesn't make sense to use this as a foreign policy tool. As she puts it, Backfire explores the surprising ways sanctions affect multinational companies, governments, and ultimately millions of people around the world. As well as, sanctions also reshape relationships between countries, pushing governments that are at the odds with the US closer to each other, or increasingly to Russia and China. To give you an idea how against would its author be of making this a pro-Russia book, this is an article she published in Foreign Policy in 2023, literally titled, "Don't Trust Russia's Numbers. Moscow has made economic statistics a central part of its information war." So overall it's an insightful and interesting book that we recommend to anyone, but how could it be related to active measures? Well, this isn't, but this potentially is. And we say potentially because there are no hard evidence, as you'll also see on your own, but there are some indicators. Remember what we talked about for successful disinformation operations. You want real facts, but presented in a way that favors your narrative. Well, this book is quite objective and unbiased, but by introducing a little bit of bias, you can make it appear as if the United States are falling apart and sanctions are the root cause of it. If the reader starts reading it with this mindset, it will enforce a narrative that Russia has the upper hand and that they are being treated completely unfairly, thus gaining more domestic and regional support. And what's more authoritative than a French economic expert telling them that Russia is winning and US is losing? And here we have the suspicious activities. The first part was to translate this book to Russian, something that was done without the author's consent. But still, this wouldn't be enough for us to include it in the spy collection. In this book, there is also an attempt to influence the reader. The first part that someone will likely read is the preface, and unlike the original one, this, let's call it unauthorized Russian translation, this has a preface written by Oleg Buklemishev, director of the Economic Policy Center in Moscow State University. Oleg Buklemishev is also a true subject matter expert, and even more so domestically. But Agate Demarais has never even talked to him about this, or even agreed to have this section in this modified translated version of her book. Knowing all of that, here is the preface from Oleg Buklemishev. Please pause the video if you like to read those, but those are not that important. But the last couple of paragraphs look like they try to shape the reader's perception. They say, "It would be hard to choose a more opportune moment for the publication of A. Demarais' book in Russian. After all, Russia today is undoubtedly the world champion in terms of the number, diversity, and intensity of imposed restrictive measures. Moreover, our country is the largest economy ever subjected to such sweeping sanctions and imposed by a broad coalition that includes not only states, but also a significant number of non-state actors, commercial companies, public organizations, and others. Thus, genuine interest in the book from readers is guaranteed, and everyone can independently judge how convincing the author's arguments are, not only on their own merits, but also against the backdrop of unfolding events in the current political and economic agenda. It turns out that the contemporary history and theory of sanctions and resistance to them is being written before our eyes. Unfortunately, in this story, Russian citizens are not detached or impartial observers, but precisely the side that's being dealt the heaviest blow. Oleg Buklemishev, Associate Professor, Department of Microeconomics Policy and Strategic Management, Faculty of Economics, Lomonosov, Moscow State University. And it's not only here. Even in the cover we find a review along those lines, that it isn't available in the original publication. A comment from another expert from Russia. It says, "The author's predictions are coming true, literally paragraph by paragraph." Anastasia Likhacheva, Dean of the Faculty of Global Economy and International Affairs at the National Research University, Higher School of Economics. Of course, we don't know if that was an honest mistake, a bureaucratic misalignment or something of that sort, especially given that the Russian publisher of this book is well known for publishing translated books, and Oleg Buklemishev being a world-class economist. So while it could indeed be a series of coincidences, it could also be a disinformation operation. Let us know what you think about it too, now that you have both the context and the content. Also, we didn't read the entire Russian version to see if there are any other changes inside the book, so we cannot comment about it. Unfortunately, the world of espionage is typically in the grey area, And what we've just seen in this very first episode of 2026 shows that in a practical manner. The first goal of a clandestine activity is to remain unattributable and without anyone realizing that it actually took place. So was this a common mistake between the publishers or something more devious? We might never know, or we might get to know the answer one day. But as we always say, nothing is as it seems.